I'm going to talk today about The Adventures of Robin Hood by Roger Lancelyn Green. But before I get into that, I'm going to give some brief background on my history with Robin Hood. So, 3 years ago, I reviewed The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle on my blog and also on this YouTube channel. Now, I got this book out of my school library. I wasn't particularly looking for this, but I stumbled across it when I was looking for something light to read. I had always been interested in Robin Hood, but kind of in a vague sense, not really in an intense sense. My introduction to the Robin Hood legend was these Fisher Price books. I don't know if anybody else from the 1980s remembers these books. They were an adaptation of Marvel comic books. So Marvel in the 1970s had published Marvel Classic Comics, which was like a comic book edition of classic stories and books. Fisher Price took 6 of them, and there was a little cassette tape that went with them, and you played the cassette tape while you listened to it. And I listened to this, I don't know how many times when I was 7 years old, to the point where I can still remember that tape playing in my mind even now. But anyways, this was my introduction to Robin Hood. Um, I'm sure all of us have our own introduction to Robin Hood, right? It was a part of our all of our childhoods in one way or another, but this was mine. And for years, never bothered to track down or read the books. Now, in my defense, there's not really a clear cut origin story for Robin Hood. There's no like one classic book you can read. But when I got this out of the school library, I realized that this was one of the classic books, arguably. This book was the Howard Pyle book, was published in 1883. According to Wikipedia, it was one of the influential books in terms of shaping Robin Hood's legend for the 20th century. And as far as I can tell, it is the earliest Robin Hood novel that is still in print today. So not counting the ballads, not counting the stage plays, not counting something like Ivanhoe, where Robin Hood is a side character in the story. But in terms of the Robin Hood novels, or Robin Hood books, this is the earliest Robin Hood book that is still in print today. So if you're looking for the origin of Robin Hood as we know him today, I guess this is as good a place to start as any. But it did get me curious when I read this book. I thought, there are a handful of other books about Robin Hood, at least according to Wikipedia. And again, a lot of them are no longer in print, but of the ones that are in print, published near the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century, and I have some childhood nostalgia or fondness for this story, like I said, because of the Fisher Price comic. So I had it in the back of my mind that it might be interesting to track down some of the other classic books about Robin Hood. And then I found this on Book Street, which is a used book street, or a street in Saigon that sells books. Some of them new, some of them used. I got this one used, and it says Puffin Classics right there, so it is a classic. And it's by Roger Lancelyn Green. Now, Roger Lancelyn Green was an author I recognized. I've never read anything by him, but let's go over to his Wikipedia bio. I'm familiar with his reputation. So he was, according to his bio, he was one of the Inklings, which is the literary discussion group along with C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. Although, slight digression here, if you go and click on the Inklings link, his name doesn't pop up there. Not even among the visitors or the guests. In fact, I did a Control F search on this whole Wikipedia article. His name doesn't pop up once. So that's odd, isn't it? Okay. So, I guess according to his own Wikipedia page, he's a member of the Inklings. According to the Inklings Wikipedia page, he was not a member. If anyone, you know, anyone knows anything about any of this, feel free to let me know in the comments. Anyways, moving on. I'm familiar with a couple of his books by reputation. The Luck of Troy, which I believe is a famous novel about the Trojan War written in the 20th century. Although no Wikipedia page here, it's still in print. I believe my brother studied it at university. He took a course on young adult literature, classic young adult literature. Also, he has a book on the Norse heroes. Where is that? Somewhere here. Tales of the Norsemen, which Neil Gaiman mentioned as one of his introductions to Norse mythology. And this was, here we go, The Myths of the Norsemen. And Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, he mentions this book in his foreword. Yeah, I was familiar with his reputation because of those two books. So this I've been meaning to check him out for some time, but just haven't come across one of his books. So here we go. This book combines my interest in Robin Hood with an author I've been meaning to check out for some time, and it's a classic. Although, how much of a classic is it really? This book was first published in 1956. Now, in one sense, I guess that is a classic book, right? Because the vast majority of books that were published in 1956 are not still in print. This book is still in print. It's survived all these, 70 years now, about since 1956. So that can be considered a classic. On the other hand, though, when we consider like the classic Robin Hood novels, I can't imagine that this book was that influential in shaping the Robin Hood legend. And the reason was the Errol Flynn movie came out in 1938. So this was like almost 20 years after the Errol Flynn movie. So we are well into the Hollywood Robin Hood era here, which means that I think it's probably fair to say that by this time in history, in terms of shaping Robin Hood's myth and Robin Hood's persona and Robin Hood's legend, Hollywood is now in the driver's seat. And nobody really is paying attention to what's being printed in books, right? So, I guess, yeah, a classic in the sense that it's an old book still being printed, but I don't think anything after the Hollywood era, any book after the Hollywood era is going to be all that influential in terms of the Robin Hood mythos. Also, for whatever this is worth, once again, there's no Wikipedia article on it. So there's a couple of Roger Lancelyn Green's books that have hyperlinks to their own Wikipedia article, but not this one. So how classic can it be if there's no Wikipedia article? I don't know. Once again, if anyone knows anything about this, let me know in the comments. Have you read this book? What do you know about its influence? How influential is it? Etc. Now, sorry, I'm going to move over here, get away from the computer. Roger Lancelyn Green opens up with his author's note by saying essentially what I was just saying, that it's very difficult to tell the story of Robin Hood because there's no really authoritative version. So Robin Hood had no Mallory. This is referring to Thomas Mallory, who wrote like the definitive account of King Arthur. He has had a few poets. It kind of goes through the list, but basically there's not that much written material to draw on before the 19th century. Roger Lancelyn Green gives us the material he's drawing on here. Interestingly enough, he does not mention Howard Pyle. And I don't know why that is. Howard Pyle is an American. Roger Lancelyn Green is English. So maybe Howard Pyle just wasn't that influential on that side of the Atlantic. I don't know. He does mention somebody else, Alfred Knowles, as what does he say here? Yeah, it was left for the 20th century to give us the finest poetic play yet written, with Robin as a hero. Alfred Knowles' Robin Hood, from 1926, acted the same year. Now, I looked this up on Wikipedia, and Alfred Knowles, Noise, does have his own Wikipedia article, but this play does not have its own Wikipedia article. So, how classic can it be, I ask you? But this seems to be what Roger Lancelyn Green considers the best 20th century rendition of Robin Hood. Never mentions Errol Flynn once here either, even though this was published 18 years after Errol Flynn's movie. But, Roger Lancelyn Green is interested in literature, so fair enough. He goes on to claim that his book is based on authority throughout. So going back to the original ballads, but also he's informed by later instances. Now, when I was reading Howard Pyle's book, I was constantly going back to Wikipedia to see where these characters came from, how Howard Pyle's renditions of them lines up with the earlier ballads. And I was interested in that because Wikipedia had made such a big deal about how Howard Pyle's book was one of the ones that shaped Robin Hood. That was 3 years ago now, how time flies. And I didn't make quite as much of an effort to do that with this book because, I already did that once. And for the most part, I'm going to try not to compare this book to Howard Pyle too much. But there are some things I noticed. The biggest difference, I guess, is Maid Marian was not in Howard Pyle's book at all, except from like a couple of very passing references. And I surmised at the time that the reason for that was Maid Marian did not appear much in the ballads. She became more of a figure in some of the later stage plays, I think, but she wasn't much in the ballads. But Maid Marian is very much a central character in Roger Lancelyn Green's version. Will Scarlet has an interesting characterization here. Will Scarlet is like Robin's older, middle-aged manservant, who is depicted as several years older than Robin Hood, which is not how he appeared in Howard Pyle, and according to Wikipedia, not how he usually appears. Will Scarlet usually appears as like the younger cousin of Robin Hood, or sometimes the same age as Robin Hood, but I couldn't find anywhere in Wikipedia where Will Scarlet was portrayed as older than Robin Hood, so I wonder where Roger Lancelyn Green got that from. I mean, it could well be that he's drawing on a number of sources, and as he says in his introduction, some of them are later sources. So maybe in one of the later stage plays, Will Scarlet was portrayed as older. Again, if anybody knows, let me know. And then one more, and then I'll stop with the comparisons here. Guy of Gisborne was portrayed in Howard Pyle's book as like a paid assassin who was hired to track down Robin Hood. And I looked that up on Wikipedia because that portrayal intrigued me. And sure enough, that does seem to be the way Guy of Gisborne originally entered into the Robin Hood story, like in the original ballads. He was a paid assassin. Now, in many more modern versions, Guy of Gisborne is like a nobility. He's like Sir Guy of Gisborne. And that's the way it was in the Errol Flynn version as well, right? And that's the way he's portrayed in Sir Roger Lancelyn Green's version. And again, I'm not sure what he's basing that on, if that's an influence of the Errol Flynn movie, or if it's, I don't know. Again, if anyone knows, let me know. Okay, so I just mentioned that as, I don't know, as context. So even though Sir Roger Lancelyn Green says he's basing these on the old authorities, my own research is showing that Howard Pyle's version seemed to have been more true to the original version of some of these characters, but I haven't read everything that Roger Lancelyn Green is drawing on, so I don't know. What I will say for Roger Lancelyn Green's version is that it's very readable. And Howard Pyle's version was written in 1883, and it read like something that was written in another century. This version is from 1956, so, modern. And it reads very smoothly and easily, and very, very easy to keep turning the pages and reading this. Now, the legend of Robin Hood itself is very episodic. This was true in Howard Pyle's book as well. I think this is a legacy of these being a bunch of different stories that were collected in ballads and passed through over time. So there's, Robin Hood and the Butcher, The Adventures of the Beggar, Robin Hood and the Tanners, The Wedding of Allan O'Dale, Robin Hood and the Bishop. And these are all just separate adventures that Robin Hood goes on. Each one its own episode. That the episodic nature of it makes it both a plus and a minus. Again, this was true for Howard Pyle's book as well. On the plus side, they're very quick and easy to read, and it's like reading through a storybook almost. You read one short adventure, it wraps up nicely. You go on to another short adventure. The adventures themselves are paced just about perfectly. So there's Robin Hood will have a little bit of a scheme. You'll see the setup. You'll see it fester for a little while. And then it'll pay off and finish before you are even bored of it. And then go on to a next adventure. The disadvantage of having it be episodic is it maybe lacks a narrative momentum to pull you through the book. Although Roger Lancelyn Green has done a good job of trying to integrate these into more of a traditional story arc. And once again, not having read everything he's read, I'm not sure how much of this is his own invention and how much of this comes from other sources. But for example, Friar Tuck comes in chapter 8, and this is the famous story about Friar Tuck and Robin Hood on the river. Here's the picture, which I suspect most people have already heard before. But he's set up as Michael Tuck much earlier. And in fact, as Michael Tuck, he was the priest and confessor of Maid Marian earlier. And Maid Marian's father is opposed to Robin Hood. Friar Tuck, known as Michael Tuck at the time, takes her side and gets expelled by her father, and then ends up on the hermitage on the river. So there's some effort to tie together some threads and some foreshadowing, and especially at the beginning and maybe at the end. The middle is just a whole bunch of episodes. A lot of these episodes are the exact same as the ones that appeared in Howard Pyle, and no surprise there because they come from the same sources, huh? So Robin Hood and the Butcher, The Adventures of the Beggars, the Robin Hood and the Tanner, Wedding of Allan O'Dale, Robin Hood and the Bishop. These are all ones I had heard before. On the other hand, some of them were new. So George Green, the Pinner of Wakefield. I'd not heard that one before. Look this up on Wikipedia, and George Green, the Pinner of Wakefield comes from a play, which actually Roger Lancelyn Green did mention in his introduction. Yeah, chapter 16 uses two scenes of George a Green from a play. Um, I I had forgotten that. I just now when I was rereading the introduction, I remembered that, but I forgot that initially. So I looked him up on Wikipedia. Um, there's where is it? There's a story about a witch here as well. What was the story about? Here we go. The Witch of Paperwick. This one was not in the Howard Pyle version, so this was a new story here. So there were some new stories in here as well. Robin Hood's last adventure, where he goes on a ship and fights pirates. Sorry, let me find a picture of that one. That was not in the Howard Pyle version, so that was a new story for me. So yeah, a mixture of revisiting some stories I had already heard before. And then some of these stories are just so canonical. I'm sure you've heard them a million times, like Robin Hood and Little John. Well, Robin Hood meeting Little John, crossing the log in the forest. This is a story I've heard I don't know how many times. This pops up in every version of Robin Hood, right? And yeah, the archery tournament. That's another one that always pops up. Actually, that one pops up twice. There are two different versions of it in this one. The Silver Arrow, and then where was the last one? The Silver Bugle and the Black Knight. I've not actually read Ivanhoe. Although I suppose one of these days I really should, especially if I plan on going any further down this rabbit hole of reading the classic Robin Hood books. Ivanhoe is, I believe, a 19th century, early 19th century historical fiction by Sir Walter Scott, in which Robin Hood is a side character in it. I've not actually read it, so I'm just going off of its reputation. It's frequently cited as one of the early appearances of Robin Hood in literature. Or no, sorry, that's wrong. What would be the best way to describe it? One of the canonical appearances of Robin Hood in literature? Because Robin Hood was in ballads and plays going back to like the 14th or the 15th century. So he's much older than the 19th century. But Ivanhoe was, I don't know, one of the important books in the Robin Hood canon, I guess is how you would describe it. So the Ivanhoe Knight character does show up here in the chapter. I believe it's the Silver Bugle and the White Knight. Yeah, here we go. Who turned out to be a certain Sir Wilfrid of Ivanhoe, one of King Richard's most faithful friends, blah, 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 blah. In my opinion, this brief reference to Ivanhoe in this chapter is a little bit clumsy. It feels a little bit shoehorned in. One of the few criticisms I have of what I otherwise thought was a well-written and very pleasant to read book. Yeah, what else do I want to say about this? I don't really actually have that much insightful to say about this. It ends on a sad note. I was looking up reviews on Amazon before filming this, and somebody was complaining about the ending. But, I know this is a bummer of a note to end up on, Robin Hood dying, but that is the original legend. Again, that was in Howard Pyle's book. That was in the Fisher-Price book, comic book version that I grew up on. I think most versions have Robin Hood dying like that. I understand. It's if I was writing the Robin Hood legend, I would have left this part out, right? Robin Hood is like Batman or Zorro or something like that. You don't need to write his death scene. He just stays 35 forever, and he stays living out in the forest, and he stays happy with his merry men, and we don't need to find out how he dies. But This is part of the legend. I think this is one of the oldest parts of the legend, in fact. So we're stuck with it. You can complain about it, but you can't blame Roger Lancelyn Green. To be fair, that was only just one review I saw on Amazon, but I was thinking about it. Okay, I don't really think I have that much more to say about this, other than while I was reading this, I found this book on Book Street, also on Book Street, and this is another classic version of Robin Hood. This one, Wordsworth Classics. I think this one was published in 1912. So if I'm going to stay on this kick, I might just have to read this one next. I don't know if it would be a little bit boring to read 2 Robin Hood books in a row. I have to read all the same stories all over again about him fighting with Little John on the bridge and stuff like that. But at the same time, it would be interesting to compare the two. Well, one is fresh in my memory. I don't know. I might do this one next. We'll see. But for now, I'm going to finish off here.